A human man, desperate for companionship, orders a mail-order alien bride only to find her bruised, broken, and fleeing from a dangerous past. As dark secrets unravel, they find themselves pursued by ruthless alien enemies, thrust into a deadly game of survival. With every step, the stakes grow higher and the line between love and war blurs. As their enemies close in, trust and strength become their only weapons. Will they escape? Or will the past catch up with them, sealing their fate? The human man's mail-order bride is more than he bargained for now. He's in a fight for his life and theirs. Hey, yes, if you love thrilling sci-fi stories with a twist, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below with your thoughts. Let's dive into. John had always dreamed of having someone by his side, a companion who would share his life and dreams. That's why he decided to go through the unusual route of a mail-order bride. The idea seemed simple enough: a beautiful, exotic alien woman who would be loyal, loving, and, most importantly, would bring him peace. But nothing in his life would ever be simple again after she arrived. The ship landed quietly under the cover of night, its metallic hull reflecting the soft glow of the nearby stars. John stood at the edge of the landing pad, anticipation coursing through his veins. The moment had come. His bride, sent from a distant planet, was finally here. He had been waiting for weeks, looking forward to a new chapter in his life. When the ship's door slid open, John's heart skipped a beat. The alien woman stepped out, but she wasn't what he had imagined. Her skin, usually glowing with the radiant colors of her kind, was pale and bruised. Her eyes, full of fear and exhaustion, met his only briefly before she lowered her gaze. She was tall, with sharp features and delicate markings on her skin. But her bruises told a different story, one of pain and hardship. John's heart sank. He had been expecting someone elegant, composed, and ready to begin their new life together. But instead he was faced with a broken, fragile woman. She took slow, hesitant steps toward him, her hands trembling as they clutched the edges of her cloak. "Are you all right?" John asked, his voice filled with concern. He stepped closer to help her, but she recoiled slightly, clearly not used to such kindness. She looked away, unwilling to meet his gaze for long. "I am fine," she whispered, her voice soft, barely audible. "I'm just tired." Her accent was strange, foreign, and it made John's heart ache. There was more to her words, but she didn't say it. Whatever had happened to her, it was clear she was running from something, or someone. John didn't know what to do. He had heard stories of alien brides sent to Earth, but none of them had ever mentioned bruises like these. Was this part of the process? Was she always like this? Or had something happened to her during her journey? As he led her into his home, she remained distant, lost in her own thoughts. She didn't speak much, and when she did, it was in broken phrases. John tried to reassure her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, a secret that lay buried deep within her. Hours passed, and the silence between them grew. Finally, just as he was about to give up on breaking through to her, she spoke again. "I didn't come here to be loved. I came here to survive," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. John's stomach churned. What did she mean by that? Was this really a simple marriage, or was there something far darker at play? As he looked into her eyes, John realized this was just the beginning of a much more complicated story. A story of secrets, betrayal, and a war that neither of them was ready for. She sat by the window, her gaze lost in the night outside. The silence in the house was suffocating, almost as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to break. John watched her from across the room, unsure of how to approach. She had been quiet since she arrived, barely speaking, only nodding or shaking her head in response to his questions. There was a wall around her, one made of fear, pain, and something darker that he couldn't quite understand. The house felt cold, despite the warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth. He could tell she was trying to avoid him, yet her eyes always flickered in his direction when she thought he wasn't looking. He had no idea what kind of life she had lived before arriving here, but it was clear that it wasn't one of comfort or peace. The bruises on her arms were a silent testament to that. She had been through something awful that she wasn't ready to talk about. As the night stretched on, John couldn't help but wonder about her story. Who was she really? What had led her to this point? A mail-order bride? The thought seemed absurd now, knowing what he did. He had imagined a different life, a beautiful woman, eager to start a new chapter with him. He had never expected this. He finally decided to break the silence. "You don't have to stay here if you're uncomfortable," he said gently, his voice softer than he intended. "I can help you get back, wherever you need to go." She flinched at his words, as if afraid of what he might offer. Slowly she turned toward him. Her eyes, dark and filled with a storm of emotions, met his for the first time since her arrival. "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered. Her voice trembled, betraying the fear she was trying so hard to hide. "They will find me if I leave. I have no choice." John's heart sank. The way she said it, the desperation in her voice, told him that her past was something far worse than he had imagined. She wasn't just a bride, she was a fugitive. And the life she had been running from was closing in on her. "Who's after you?" he asked before he could stop himself, his curiosity and concern driving him forward. She shook her head as though she had said too much already. "I can't tell you," she murmured. "It's too dangerous." The silence stretched between them again, heavier than before. John's mind raced with questions, but he held them back. He could sense that she wasn't ready to open up, that whatever she was hiding was too painful to share. But something inside him shifted. He couldn't just sit back and let her suffer in silence. He had to know more. She wasn't just some alien bride who had come for a simple life. She was someone who had been through hell, and he wasn't going to let her face it alone. "Whatever it is," he said, stepping closer, "you're safe here. I won't let anyone hurt you." Her eyes softened, just for a moment before she quickly looked away. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "They won't stop until they have me, and I'm not the only one they're after." John's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" But before she could answer, there was a sudden sharp sound, a loud bang from outside. Both of them froze, the room falling deathly still. Someone was out there, and John knew in that instant that whatever she had been running from had found them. The sound of the bang echoed through the house, sending a chill down John's spine. His heart pounded in his chest as he turned to look at her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but there was no surprise in them. Only the cold, hard reality of someone who had expected this moment. The fear was something deeper, something she had lived with for far too long. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if saying it too loudly might make it all real. "I told you they would come." John rushed to the door, his mind racing. The house, tucked away in the quiet outskirts, was supposed to be a safe haven, a place where he could build a new life. But that dream was slipping away quickly as shadows moved outside. He could see them now, figures moving silently in the dark, like predators stalking their prey. "They won't stop," she said again, her voice breaking. "They never do. Once they start, it's always the same. I can't go back. I won't." John looked back at her, uncertainty flooding his thoughts. This was no longer about an alien bride. This was about survival, and it was clear that his life, his quiet, simple life, was now part of a much larger, dangerous game. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice steady but his insides in turmoil. She closed her eyes, taking a shaky breath. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with the weight of painful memories. "They're the Razar, a faction of my people who believe in control. They want me back because of who I was, what I knew, but I'm not that person anymore. I left them behind. And they won't rest until they have me." John could feel the weight of her words, the deep, raw fear that she carried with her. The Razar were no mere enemies. They were a force to be reckoned with, powerful and ruthless. And now they were coming for her, coming for both of them. He turned to the window, scanning the shadows outside. The figures were closer now, moving with purpose, their silhouettes sharp against the dim light of the night. He could almost feel their presence like a looming storm ready to strike. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice tight. There was no plan, no easy solution. His mind was racing, trying to find a way out of this nightmare, but the truth was there was no way out, not without risking everything. "We have to leave," she said, her voice suddenly filled with a quiet determination. She stood up from the chair, her eyes locking onto his with a fire he hadn't seen before. "They will come for us if we stay here. I know the path. I know where we can hide." John's heart skipped a beat. This was real. She wasn't just scared, she was ready to fight. But was he ready? He had never imagined his life would come to this, never thought he'd be running from ruthless alien enemies with a woman he barely knew. But one thing was clear now, he couldn't turn his back on her. Not after everything she had told him. Without another word, he grabbed his jacket and rushed to the door, his mind already working on the next step. "Where do we go?" he asked, his voice low, filled with urgency. "To the mountains," she replied, her voice firm. "It's the only place they won't think to look. But we have to hurry. They're already closing in." John nodded, his pulse racing as he stepped into the night, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. The world outside had changed in an instant, and now there was no going back. The mountain air was sharp and cold as John and his alien bride made their way through the dense forest. The ground beneath them a mixture of rocks and fallen leaves. The path they were following was barely visible, hidden by years of overgrowth and the thick shadows of the trees that towered above them. The silence around them was deafening, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps and the occasional distant howl of wild animals. But beneath that silence was an unspoken tension, a constant reminder that they weren't alone. The Razar were out there hunting them. John glanced at his companion, her face lit by the faint glow of the moon. She moved with an eerie grace, her eyes scanning the dark surroundings with a wariness that matched his own. He had seen her afraid before, but this was different. There was something about the way she carried herself now, something fierce, like she was preparing for the storm that was coming. "You're quiet," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You've been through worse, haven't you?" She didn't answer right away, and for a moment John thought she might ignore him. But then her voice cut through the darkness, low and filled with a sadness he hadn't expected. "I've been running for years," she said, her words laced with a bitter truth. "From them, from myself, from everything. I thought this life would be different. I thought I could escape it all." She stopped walking for a moment, her eyes locked on the path ahead, her expression distant, as though lost in a memory. But some things don't let go, and they never will. John's heart ached for her. He had known there was more to her story than she had shared, but hearing her speak of it so openly, it struck him deep. She wasn't just an alien bride. She was a woman haunted by her past, a past that had shaped her into someone who couldn't trust, couldn't rest. Her entire life had been one long escape, and now she was pulling him into that world of fear and danger. "We'll make it through this," John said, trying to reassure both her and himself. "We have to." She gave him a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You don't understand," she whispered, her gaze shifting to the ground. "They'll never stop coming for me. They'll track us, find us, and when they do, it will be worse than anything I've faced before." John swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had no idea what the Razar were capable of, but he could see the fear in her eyes. He could feel it in the way she moved, like a hunted animal on edge, constantly aware of every sound, every shift in the wind. Without another word, they pressed on, the mountain path twisting and turning as they ascended higher into the darkness. The deeper they went, the more isolated they became. The noise of the world seemed to fade away, replaced by the heavy thumping of their hearts and the frantic rhythm of their breathing. John didn't know how long they had been walking, but the cold was starting to seep into his bones, and the tension in the air was becoming unbearable. Suddenly, the silence shattered with the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind them. John's heart skipped a beat, his body instinctively tensing. He turned, scanning the shadows, but there was nothing, just the empty, eerie blackness of the forest. "They're here," she said, her voice sharp with fear, and for the first time since they started this journey, John saw the full extent of the terror she had been hiding. Before he could react, there was a crack, a snap of a branch, and then movement, a shadow darting across the path. And then, the unmistakable sound of boots crunching on the ground. "They're closing in," her voice was barely audible. "Run! Without thinking, John grabbed her hand, pulling her forward. The chase had begun, and there was no turning back. The cold wind howled through the trees as John and his alien bride sprinted through the dense underbrush, their breaths ragged in the freezing night air. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, the crunch of footsteps, the rustle of leaves. There was no mistaking it now. They weren't just being followed. They were being hunted. John's heart raced, not just from the fear of being caught, but from the raw realization that his life had been turned upside down in the span of a few hours. He had gone from a man waiting for a peaceful life with an alien bride to a fugitive, running through a dark forest with enemies who had no mercy. He had no training, no experience with this kind of danger. He was just a man caught in the wake of a war he had never asked to be a part of. But as he glanced at her, he saw something that gave him hope. The alien woman, his bride, was no longer the fragile, broken woman he had met. She had transformed into something fierce, her eyes sharp and calculating. She moved with an unnatural speed, her steps light and silent, as if the very shadows were helping her evade detection. The fear that had once consumed her was now replaced with determination. She wasn't just running to survive, she was running to fight. "I know this forest," she said, her voice steady despite the panic in the air. "We can lose them in the ravines up ahead. But we need to get there fast." John nodded, trying to keep up with her, his legs burning from the strain. "I'm with you," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "Just lead the way." But before they could make it to the ravines, they heard it, a low, guttural growl from the darkness ahead. The Razar. They were closing in on them, using the forest's natural sounds to mask their movements, but the sound of that growl, like an animal's snarl, was unmistakable. They were using beasts, hunting dogs possibly, trained to track their prey. "They've brought the hounds," she whispered, her face hardening. "They won't stop until we're cornered." John's pulse quickened. He could hear the hounds now, their growls getting closer with every passing second. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he looked around, searching for an escape. They were running out of time. Without warning, she tugged at his arm, pulling him toward a narrow, hidden path that wound deeper into the forest. The trail was barely visible, almost as if nature itself had tried to erase it. But she knew it well, and John trusted her. For the first time since they'd started running, he had no doubts. They pushed forward, weaving through thick trees and over jagged rocks. The hounds were still behind them, but their growls were softer now, fainter, as if the sound of their pursuit was fading. John's heart pounded in his chest, not from the chase, but from the realization that they might actually escape. But then they heard it, a snap of a twig, a shadow in the distance, and then another. "They've caught up," she said, her voice tight. "We don't have much time," John's mind raced. There had to be something, some way to stop them, to fight back. But he was unarmed, and his strength alone wouldn't be enough. His only chance was to trust her. With a swift motion, she turned to face him. "Listen to me. You need to trust me now. I'm going to stop them. I need you to stay back and keep your head down. Do you understand?" John hesitated, the weight of her words pressing down on him. But he saw the fire in her eyes, the raw determination, and he knew that there was nothing he could do but follow her lead. "Go," she said urgently. "Now!" Without waiting for his response, she sprinted ahead, disappearing into the darkness like a shadow. John stayed behind, his heart in his throat. As he listened to the sounds of the pursuit grow louder once again, he had no idea what she was planning, but in that moment, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, he was in this fight with her to the end. The wind was biting, the chill of the night creeping into John's bones as he crouched low behind a cluster of trees, his breath shallow and rapid. The sound of the hounds was no longer a distant growl. Now it was a constant presence, close, relentless. He could hear their claws scraping against the ground, their heavy breaths in the air, and with each passing second, the dread in his chest grew heavier. He looked up, scanning the darkened forest for any sign of his bride. She had disappeared into the night, vanishing into the shadows without a trace, just as she had promised. He wanted to trust her, to believe that she could handle whatever was coming, but doubt gnawed at him. What if she couldn't? What if they were too late, too far gone? Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled slightly. The trees rustled, a sound unlike any other, and then a flash of movement. A silhouette darted through the forest, low and fast. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized her, the alien woman, his bride. She was moving toward him, her body fluid and graceful, every movement calculated and swift. But something was different. She was no longer running to escape. She was running to fight. She held herself with an air of readiness, like a predator preparing for a strike. When she reached him, she didn't stop. She barely even glanced at him, her focus solely on the path ahead. "They're close," she said through clenched teeth, her voice laced with tension. "They'll be upon us in minutes." John felt his pulse spike. "What now?" "We take the high ground," she replied, her eyes flashing with determination. "I've set a trap, but we need to move quickly. They won't expect us to fight back. We can use that to our advantage." She turned sharply, grabbing his arm, pulling him in the direction of the ravine they had passed earlier. The path was steep and narrow, and John stumbled over rocks and roots as they climbed higher. But there was no time to think, no time to hesitate. All he could do was follow her, trusting that she knew what she was doing. They reached the top of the ridge, and she motioned for him to crouch behind a large boulder. The hound's growls were growing louder, but they hadn't yet reached their position. His bride moved quickly, preparing something. A device, some kind of alien technology. She'd pulled from the folds of her cloak. "Stay quiet," she ordered, her voice firm. "When they get close, I'll activate it. It'll throw them off." John nodded, his mind racing. He didn't fully understand what she was doing, but he knew one thing for sure. This was the moment. It was do or die. They couldn't run anymore. They couldn't hide. They had to fight, and this was the first step. The hound's growls were deafening now, closer than ever. And just as John thought the world was about to explode around them, she flicked a switch. A brilliant, blinding light burst from the device, casting eerie shadows across the forest floor. The sound that followed was unlike anything John had ever heard, a terrifying, high-pitched noise that sent a ripple of panic through the air. The hounds stopped, their howls of confusion mixing with the noise, and John felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The device hummed softly, its light flickering and then steadying, casting an eerie glow over the forest. The hounds, once howling in pursuit, suddenly fell silent. John's pulse raced as the air thickened with tension. The world felt suspended, as if everything had paused, waiting for the next move. He glanced at his bride. Her expression was unreadable, her focus entirely on the shifting shadows in the distance. For a moment, he thought it had worked. The hounds were confused, lost in the disorienting sound and light. But then a sharp, guttural growl pierced the silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. The Razar were close now, their heavy boots thudding against the earth as they approached, their voices low but clear in the night air. John's heart skipped a beat. "They're coming. We don't have much time." His bride didn't flinch. She simply turned her attention back to the device, adjusting it with a precision that only someone like her, someone who had lived through this kind of fight, could have. She knew exactly what to do. She knew how to survive. "You need to get ready," she said, her voice sharp and calm. "When they get close, I'll trigger the next phase. It'll buy us enough time to escape." John nodded, though the weight of what was happening pressed down on him. He wasn't just running now. He wasn't just following her, he was part of this fight too. He had no training, no skills, but he had something else now. Resolve. He would not let her face this alone. Not anymore. The ground trembled again, but this time, it wasn't the growls of the hounds. It was the unmistakable sound of more Razar approaching, their voices sharp with command. "Find them!" one of them shouted. "Don't let them escape. They are close." The sound of their movement grew louder, and John could hear the snap of twigs, the brush of heavy clothing against tree trunks. They were almost there. His bride looked at him now, her eyes locking with his for a split second, just enough for him to see the fear in her gaze, the vulnerability she had been hiding. "Stay behind me," she whispered. And don't move until I say. With a flick of her wrist, she activated the device again. This time, the light turned a violent red, a pulse of energy shooting through the air. The Razar soldiers froze, their movements halted by the blast of electromagnetic force. The hounds howled in agony, their bodies writhing as they were thrown off balance. John didn't waste a second. He sprinted towards her, his feet pounding against the earth, his mind focused only on getting to safety. The Razar were momentarily stunned, but they wouldn't stay down for long. He could feel the desperation in the air. The fight was just beginning. But his bride was ahead of him, moving like a shadow, her form a blur as she darted through the trees. She wasn't just running for her life anymore. She was running for something bigger, for freedom, for a future. And John, for the first time, understood that he was running with her. Together, they could face whatever came next.